So AI is doing the right thing under uncertainty. So you're choosing optimal actions, uncertain estimates of where you are now or where you might be. So it's really operations research plus statistics. We had these fields going back to the 50s, but they were dissimilar. They said, you guys doing AI, you're tackling something you don't want to tackle. So we had to make them up. And that's the example I use to really show the difference between AI and software engineering. I'm a Google employee. I get this alert on my phone. I said, oh, these teams have done a really good job. Somebody parsed the email from Perks. They put it into my calendar. They noticed it was in the calendar. It was the right time. They popped up this alert. They gave me a nice map showing exactly where to go. Awesome job, team. And then they said, time of travel, 23 minutes by bicycle. Now, on the one hand, that's kind of a good suggestion because I've been commuting to work by bicycle every day about that distance. So, it works like that. On the other hand, I didn't really understand what it meant to return a rental car. So I know I should file a bug report. I start doing it, and we pull that list and says, which team is responsible for this? So wait a minute. I know everybody did their job just right. Can't really blame the people that parse the email because they put all the things in the right place. And I said, yeah, you could put in 5 lines of code that says if the email is about the rental car, then don't suggest going by bicycle. But if you put in those 5 lines, there's going to be a million other lines. And I don't really want to put that burden on that team. So I have to say, working as intended, and this is out of the scope of traditional software, but it could be in the scope of AI software. That's really the difference, right? That AI is general. It can do things that weren't expected, that seem to be completely outside the bounds in regular software. So AI should be able to handle this, but can it handle it? Key question. This is Chat GPT 4.0 just came out, and you can see it's overtrained for safety. So when you ask it, at return rental car airport, should I go by bicycle? It says, oh, you have to worry about many things. Let's worry about traffic. So it doesn't have any way to figure out what happens when you split it into two. But the AI model says, I don't care. I'm not bound by calculus rules of I can only have one variable in a continuous function. I can represent lots of complicated things, right? I think we'll see a lot of things like that where the math is great, and in some ways the math is more powerful than the AI systems if you're within the bounds that the math model strictly holds for. But if you go outside those bounds, we can do more. Here's an example. So this is math problems, and you want to come up with the right answer for it. So there's like a math test, and you can be judged did I get it right or wrong. But you also want to come up with explanations. And I think the key point here was, yeah, you can solve this with the language model, but they do it by saying, let's translate that into a program that you can run and then do the explanation. So doing it in 2 steps rather than 1. And why is that a good idea? Well, 1, it constrains it. And if the programming language is a good model for the problem, then that can be helpful. And when it's a mathematical problem, it usually is a good model. But secondly, it's much easier to evaluate the program, right? So you could have the system say, just go directly from the input to a paragraph of text as the output. And then a human could say, is that the right answer or not? But the system itself couldn't really do that. It doesn't have a good way of evaluating, did I get the right answer or not? But if you generate a program in the middle, the system could say, I'm going to do 100 tries, generate 100 program, run them all, see which ones work and see which ones don't. Maybe have them vote. So I tried different answers, got different programs, but they get when you run the programs, they get the same answer, and that gives me more confidence. So it really constrains what you're doing. And I think finding these right kinds of intermediate languages. So, English is an amazing thing. I think English is the greatest technology that humankind, or language in general, the greatest technology that humankind ever came up with. But it can't do everything. And so coming up with the right intermediate languages and coming up with things that are executable and automatically checkable rather than only checked outside the system, I think that's a really important step. So end user programming, I think, is awesome. A friend who's a biologist says, I'm not a programmer, I could never do those kinds of things. But I had this data of bird migration, and I always wanted to show them on a map and be able to play with that. And then he said, and I started using these automated AI programming tools, and I was finally able to do it. I never would have tried if I didn't have that assist. Small enterprises, if you're a big company, you've got your own internal IT team. If you're a medium-sized company, hire Salesforce or somebody. If you're a small company and you got 2 salespeople, no one's going to write the software for them. Now, maybe they can write the software themselves. Natural language interface is a universal interface. You see a complicated program with 1 million menu items. Sometimes you just want to say, here's what I want to do. And just type it into a text box. I've seen examples of this program that was overly complicated. And in 1 month, they were able to integrate it in a little text box, and people just started using that rather than using the complicated mechanism. And this idea of a trusted assistant or agent, right? So right now, if I wanted an Uber or a pizza to show up in this room, I press a button on my phone, and now I've given over complete control to DoorDash or whoever. And I'm kind of willing to do that because it mostly works most of the time. But I also kind of know that they're looking out for their own profits, number one, and I'm only number 2. Maybe we'll end up with something on our phone that we really trust and we believe it's working for me. And then we'll go out and we'll negotiate and say, hey, Lyft is better than Uber. I negotiated that for you. I kept all your privacy except for what you were willing to share, and I did all that for you. So those are some possibilities. What will the impact be? Here's a measure of real GDP growth in the US. And when I look at that, what I see is, yeah, I can see the Great Depression, I can see World War II, but I can't see much of anything else. In particular, here's the introduction of PCs. It didn't really seem to make that much difference. And at the time, people said, oh, PCs are amazing, they're going to change the world. And yeah, they helped over time a little bit, but not that much right away. And I think the issue is that, in those mid-'80s, people said, oh, think of an accountant, they got to add up 100 numbers. This is going to be so much faster. And sure, it was so much faster for adding up 100 numbers. But adding up 100 numbers was just a tiny part of what an accountant really does. And most of the things are not computable. Most of them are, just not formal like that. Just pushing paper around, just calling people and deciding things, and it didn't help with that. So, so the pessimistic view is technology doesn't make that much.
It's just like housekeepers and extreme shortage of accountants right now.
There you go.
I have 1,000 in here.
Right, and we don't have robot house cleaners. Right? We got the little vacuums. They don't do that much. They do a tiny part of the job. But maybe this time is different, right? So I am seeing this ability of people to write their own programs that never could do that before, to answer questions that they couldn't do before. So there might be this possibility that this will be more noticeable. How much will it be? So I was at a meeting of economists a couple of weeks ago, and they put up this question: what's this number of percentage of GDP growth going to be like in 10 years? And I got to tell you, economists do not know for sure, because the answers range from the complete destruction of all civilization due to the AI takeover to 2,000% GDP growth per year. And here you see things 50% and 40% productivity gains. Again, these are probably on small parts, not on the whole job. So what I look at is say, let's compare the US to China. So US has been pretty flat. China, and fortunately this chart only goes back to 2010. If you went back to 2000 or so, they had some sustained 10% growth for a while. And I think what's happening there is they were able to harvest the technology gain, build conversational agents, but it would be like, this one's an expert on accounting, this one's an expert on chemistry, and I'd have a great conversation about chemistry, but I wouldn't ask it, should I drive my mail?
Did you ever think you'd write poetry?
I thought that that would be something that you'd be less likely to invest
We
in.
never saw that coming.
Although I do remember, we did the machine translation work at Google. I do remember a poetry generator for translating poetry. But the way it worked is it just said, take the first line, translate it with the regular stuff, and now take the second line and figure out what the rhyme scheme is, and go down the list of best translations.
Very mechanical.
Until you get one that rhymes, right? Yeah. So mechanical.
I mean, actually, we won a computer computing conference award for ICIC in 2015 for what was the first rap battle bot that learned to freestyle against you by itself by going out and exploring all the rap on the internet.
Yeah.
And it actually, we experimented with writing type stuff, but then we ended up doing it completely unsupervised, and it actually figured out from zero knowledge. How did I come back with responses that were semantically relevant, that were actually rhyming? And we gave it no pronunciation information. Stuff like that.
Does anyone know how that actually, if you look at the weights, is there any analysis of like the weights of a computer, how it actually works?
Because we did both probabilistic symbolic models for that, as well as kind of recursive neural networks versions of that, so that it could actually see.
But let me say one more thing to your answer. So, I thought that at some point we get systems that are roughly as good as they are now, but I never imagined that a system that would, so one, I never imagined that we do it, train it just by throwing words at it, and not having any linguists in the loop. And secondly, I never imagined the system be so good at the things it's good at, would also be so bad. Right? So that it's, it's sort of following everything that we wrote down, but it's also gone in a different direction where it's hard to predict what the holes are.
So you get back to solving the needs that you had on the first chart. So that we solve the right side with it.
Yeah, we need to understand that better. Who's next? Okay.
So you had an awesome slide about the OpenAI codex where you described all of the various functions.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. First of all, have you seen any evidence where there's been this the reversal, so where they've actually have the solution and then trying to find a more optimal way to get to the same solution? Right, in terms of, like, for example, like you could, instead of integrating, just doing a simple integral, you could do integration by parts or some other method, right? So, trying to reverse it and say, I have the solution, here's the fastest way to get there.
Yeah. So there are some different works that start with the solutions. So one of them is just try to explain what's there. I think optimization is great because you can try to learn what are the semantic preserving transformations that lead to this optimization? And it seems as a good example of something where you could put in more actual knowledge, right? So you don't have to train it just from data. You can say, here's some things you can do, here's some moves, and so on. I think that's a great application.
And so just along those same points, right? How do you think about today the efficiency of processing of these various AI models that exist today, right? So, like, even in, like, we talked about semiconductors, right? Like on the ASIC layer, for example, where that logic could, for GPUs and CPUs is actually in some cases very efficient.
Yeah.
Right. So just love to hear your
right. So it's been a great time for NVIDIA. I think we can do a lot better. And I see, I often get annoyed with some of these things of saying, look at this horrible carbon footprint. And that's from linearly extrapolating, but we never linearly extrapolate. We always say we're going to do twice as much computing, but we're going to do it with the same cost in terms of dollars or carbon output or whatever. So I think most projections that go up like this should really be going flat because we'll figure out ways to get more efficient. And we've done a good job of saying, let's get smaller bit widths. We don't need a lot of precision. Maybe we'll have processors that are more approximate, and some work on that, saying if you don't really need to know exactly what 11 plus 12 is 23. If about 20 is good enough, then
You don't need to have a 0% error rate. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities. We'll make that more efficient. We'll come up with new architectures. And both for in the data center for cost and power reasons, and then for the edge devices for battery gains.
Nice.
So what's the difference between contextual AI as opposed to generative AI?
So I don't know if I really like these terms. So generative means that we're going to create something, right? We have a model of the possibilities. So we use this term large language model. What does model mean? So model means I can say, if you give me a prefix of words, I can say what's the probability distribution over the next word, and then I can pick one. That's a generative model. And then contextual means that I want to understand more about where I am, not just what were the previous words, but what is it I'm trying to do. And I could do more of that. I don't know if contextual would be the main word that I would focus on. So I talked about this idea of trying to put pieces together, trying to put in things that you already know and techniques that you already have, and maybe having multiple parts that communicate with each other. I think that's important. So I don't like the strictest interpretation of generative, which just says, I'm going to give you a prefix of a certain number of words, and then you compute what's the most probable next word. And once you've done that, you do the word after that, and you do the word after that. And that's not true artificial intelligence to me. To me, that's an artificial politician. So they're really good at you give them some stuff and they just spit out the next word and it doesn't matter where it's going. I'd rather have something that's a little bit more contemplative that says, that's a good question. Let's try out different things, see which works, and based on the context, and then come up with it.
Oh, sorry, can I just follow up with that? However, if it is contextual AI, say for example, spoken word, right?
Mm-hmm.
With a generative, it's going to get all kinds of crazy answers. Whereas with contextual, say for example, this meeting is being recorded,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's going to be only based on the words used in this room. It's going to give you a much better answer, right?
Unless the right answer was something outside of this.
Yeah, I'm talking about a much better answer about the discussion in this room.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can, I had understood from talking to a friend that's been doing traditional ML and neural networks and now generative AI, that was not true anymore. That, the specific case he quoted me, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, is that I think it was a Google project. They trained an LLM solely on higher mathematics, say 7 billion parameters. But then they ran it in a competition against an LLM trained on just open data of all sorts, 30 billion parameters, and that one did a better job. And he is positing that, one, we don't know how it learns, but that giving more content makes a smarter system than giving specialized content. So to that argument, even if you had 100% of what was said in this room, a bigger LLM would do a better job of understanding what happened here. Is that fair and true? And
Yeah, I think so. Because to understand what was said in the room, you have to understand what we were really talking about. It's not just the words that were said, it's how the words relate to everything else. So
do you see
all
that value in the specialized data?
Yeah,
Training
so
versus
I think you need all the background knowledge just to be able to have a conversation, right? Because people they bring in metaphors and so on, you need to understand them. But then you want to say, but this is a topic that we're focusing on, so now come back to that topic. Yeah. People use these retrieval augmented generation to say, bringing back something that matches this set of well-vetted information.
Yeah,
Final comment from.
I think Microsoft went another path with fee models and stuff, and they've proven that shit in, shit out is still true. Yeah. Because they trained on highly kind of curated book data and was pretty efficient and much smaller parameter sizes. Yes. So, but what we do right now, and we have still stage, we're just feeding the machine and brute forcing kind of, and then looking what the effects are in the networks and learning from it. But I think the truth will be maybe in between it. We just understand what is the data we should put in. Yeah, eventually.
You want to transition, Sanjeev?
Yes.
Yes.
So thank
Good
you, Dr. Norvig, for this wonderful discussion. And would it be okay if you can share this? Then with me, I'll send it around with everybody else. Yeah. And,
Thank you.
Thank you.
we'll transition over to a conversation between Dikai and Peter Norvig on topics on AI.
What are we talking about?
Ethics, for example, you said you wanted to do you had last time you said you had a interactive discussion that you wanted to lead.
And is it possible also, because some of us missed the Berkeley, to sort of, can you pick us up, what did you touch there that we maybe need to talk about here in this context?
Hey, we'll be
Are they allowed to do that?
What's relevant for this?
Well, actually, you know what? It says, tell a story about one of the other times that we met up. I remember having lunch at Hitchcock in New York, 2016, about August, so 3 months before the election. Yeah. Do you remember that conversation? Yeah, I was like, God, I'm really kind of worried about the election. You know, I knew this guy, Bob Mercer, who funded Cambridge Analytica. And it turns out, you know, about 12 years ago or so, the ACL, which is the National Language Processing Organization, honored Bob Mercer and myself for, you know, various breakthroughs that led eventually to Google Translate. And I knew about the stuff that he was doing in terms of getting the data and doing Cambridge Analytica, micro-targeting, et cetera, influence. And I was really, at that point, worried. I was talking with a lot of folks about this. I basically spent 2016 jumping up and down, trying to warn people. Howard Dean told me to my face, don't worry, you guys, we've got this back in hand. And so we were chatting about this because people were telling me, hey, look, we've got the pollsters, they're all telling us everything's just fine. I'm going, you guys are doing like polls using 300 samples on landlines only, asking a total of 3 questions, which are, by the way, do you plan to vote? Who are you going to vote for? Would you recommend that to a friend? Thank you, bye. And from that, you're making your you know, estimations. I said if anybody could predict, it would be Google or Facebook or Amazon. They could predict for you exactly. Right, and so we were having lunch, and Peter, you see how level Peter's, you know, affect is always a very solid guy since it's long term. And I remember he said, it'll be okay, I'm not worried. And that told me that Google was not running the numbers. because 3 months later, I can't remember when we had the post-election chat. And I remember you know, God, yeah, you were right. And you'd been running up and down the halls of Google research, a dozen different little sub-teams and saying, would this work? Would this work? Would this work? And they would tell you, I think you said, yeah, we thought about that, but here's why it wouldn't work. And, you know, Peter said, and I began to realize how complicated this whole problem is. And I think, you know, for those of you who were at my talk yesterday, you probably see what I mean in terms of some of the complexity. Peter touched on it earlier today as well, with this wonderful theme of the difference between, you know, getting what you want versus getting what you need. And if you remember, one of the taglines of my talk yesterday was, you don't know what you don't know. But what you don't know will come back to hurt you. And so with everything that we're seeing now, with the AIs that are powering everything from search, you know, search engines, Google recommendation engines, and social media, obviously, and now the chatbots have gone big population-wide. And essentially, these are, you know, various kinds of AI algorithms that are not just deciding what 50 items or 25 items to put in front of your eyes. They're also deciding which trillions of items on the internet they're not gonna put in front of your eyes, that they're gonna hide from you. And we ran this exercise yesterday. So probably about, what, half or a third of the people here were there yesterday? Half-ish, is that about right?
About a third.
Okay, so let me, I'll, for the other 2/3, let me just run this little exercise again.
Sure.
Okay, so last week I was speaking in Hollywood at this thing. And they had this really unconventional setup where each of the keynote was set up like a boxing ring, 360 degrees in the middle. And I was asking, the full audience, as a thought experiment, how many items a day the algorithms that decide what to put in your social media feed, your news feed, your recommendations, etc. How many items a day were you seeing that somehow mentioned China? And pretty much everybody there was like, oh God, easily a dozen, 2 dozen. What somebody said yesterday, hundreds. Oh, that was. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right? And I asked them, well, and do you feel like you have relatively strong opinions about what's going on? And everybody was like, yeah. And so then I said, okay, well, let's talk about that, because I'm someone who, with my appointment both in Hong Kong at USD and still being at Berkeley's ICSI, ping-ponging, almost weekly for 30 years, been watching very closely how things have been developing. So let's talk about some of the problems that we've been seeing, and begin with, let's talk about, so which of the Chinese government leaders today do you know besides Xi Jinping? And not one person in the entire arena. Does anybody here know him? Okay. So, even after I asked you yesterday, and so then I was like, well, okay, let's talk about maybe issues with the government, the way the governance works. What do you know about the way the government model in China works? And I don't mean this like at some political scientist level. I mean this at a 3rd grade Sesame Street, kind of Schoolhouse Rocks. Remember that?
Yes.
I think you can say it. So if we did it here, we'd be like, oh, we have a president every 4 years. There's an election. There's something called electoral college. Senate is, the Congress is Senate and House, and there's a Supreme Court at the top of the judicial system. There's 50 states. At that level, how does the Chinese government system structure? A single person in the room. And so then I was like, okay, so you see that the algorithms are putting dozens, if not hundreds, of items about China every day in front of your eyes. Does any of you think that this basic 3rd grader information is not available on the internet? I said, no, obviously it's on the internet. And so the algorithms have decided, even though they're putting all this constant barrage of information about China in front of you, they're never going to show you anything at even a 3rd grader level to have a meaningful conversation about, okay, well, why is this happening, and what would be the cause effects and all that kind of stuff. That's what I call algorithmic censorship. And we can't avoid it because, none of us can review trillions of items every day. There's billions of new items going up on the internet every hour. How are we going to, so we have to empower algorithms, obviously, to help us to figure out what we're going to look at. But at the same time, those algorithms are deciding what to hide from us. And you never know what's hidden from you because you haven't seen it. And you don't even think about it. How many of you have had this thought experiment? How many of you have ever asked yourself, how come I don't know any leader of China that I keep hearing about except Xi Jinping? It doesn't even occur to us. And that's because, and going back to this difference between getting what you want versus getting what you need, you don't even realize that you need it. And we're operating with hundreds of well-researched cognitive biases. The Danny Kahneman and Mr. Tversky and their colleagues have researched over decades. All of that is at the unconscious level, and we don't like to face that because, we have this nice mythology that we all love about our autonomy, our free will, our self-determination, our right to choice. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy, and we hate it when that's questioned. But I mentioned that I was giving a keynote in January together with Jeff Hinton. in whose lab I played for a year as a postdoc between Berkeley and Hong Kong. It was really fun. Jeff stepped down last year from Google and finally began to think about the risks of AI to humanity, and has begun to talk a little bit about it. One of the things he mentioned in his joint keynote was we humans need to watch out that we don't lose our autonomy to the AIs. And I said, sorry, Jeff, we humans lost our autonomy to the AIs 10 to 20 years ago when we handed over this right to decide what we do not ever see, that we don't know, and that we don't know we do. And this is a critical problem, and there's no easy answer for this, because any answer for this is going to, also impact upon other cherished values like, free market principles, the First Amendment, etc. They're all trolley problems. But if we don't get the population as a whole to grapple with these difficult trolley problems, it does not empower the regulators or the tech companies who, after all, no matter how good people they are not our elected, representatives in government, to actually make the hard choices. Because if they make any hard choices, they get slammed immediately by every side of the spectrum, right? Like, so the year before COVID, I was one of the 8 people that Google named to its inaugural AI ethics external advisory council. And these concerns were some of the reasons why I had been working already quite actively on that, especially after our 2016 experience with Cambridge Analytica. But those sorts of things immediately get slammed. And so that AI ethics council ended up getting slammed within 2 weeks of its formation, because one of the, I'll give a background story on this. There was like 8 people that Google had deliberately chosen people from outside the Silicon Valley bubble, right? And so they went around the world. They didn't just have Americans, they had an Italian. They selected me because they knew that not only I had the tech background, but also broad perspective I could articulate in a descriptive but nuanced way about Asia, and that I was a musician. They told me they wanted somebody who saw outside of tech. And then there was also the president of the Heritage Foundation, who and a drone company and some others, and they got massively attacked. Google got massively attacked for this, because even though this was an advisory council that was just, think of it as a very high level focus group to channel voices from outside the bubble, so that Google could integrate how would these ethics decisions actually impact upon communities, not just within its bubble, but a lot of other bubbles that we don't think about, as the thought experiment just sort of demonstrated.
Who was criticizing?
Oh my gosh! In this case, the last
so people, you try to get a broad spectrum, and so one group says, "I can't believe you allowed this person on because they're too far left," and another group says, "I can't believe you allowed this person on because they're too far right."
So the polarized sides.
We hear it every day.
Yeah.
So that's it. So you don't hear voice.
That's the caller.
So, but isn't the sort of filtering you're talking about highly generational, or at least interactional? So your question about China, which I don't know the answers to, so I ask perplexity. If you asked me that question 10 years ago, I couldn't have answered it. If you asked me 50 years ago, I couldn't have answered it. Exclusively because I don't focus on Asia, I don't care. Therefore, I never did the work to find out. And when I ask if the problem of, quote, AI taking away our sovereignty, whatever, however you think about it, isn't interactional or generational, I walk across the street to a library every day and read 2 newspapers and pick random books off the shelf. I don't think that's a normal behavior, but it's how I expose myself to things I haven't been exposed to before. My son, who's 18, reads whatever's on Reddit for 15 seconds and immediately makes a judgment. And I'm horrified by that because he never goes to the source data. But I don't see how any of I think that the problem is explicit to, we live in a bubble, we're technology driven. You go to Des Moines, I mean, there are literally still people that don't understand why would you use an iPhone? have run into that. So it feels like I'm not dismissing it as a challenge, but just pointing out that it seems to me like it's a challenge for a subset of the population who use the modality for the way they expand their knowledge or choose, if they even choose to. And I guess you could argue that don't people that want to expand their knowledge more, while people who don't care don't.
I mean, the problem is that I think the memes are shared also in person. So people talk very strongly about these issues to each other. I've heard many comments, I spend so much of my time also in the Bay Area, and many comments that are verbally being spread in groups that are very strong about this or that in China. And then I discover, okay, yeah, I mean, China's full of problems. I'm not saying that, but like to understand what the problems are instead of to misunderstand what the problems are is critical because even if you haven't selected to dive in and learn about that, you're still voting. And the politicians are very much campaigning on that issue. And this is the single geopolitical relationship, especially with AI, that is probably the most crucial for just the survival of humankind going forward. And so if voters don't know the first thing about how all the AI, the sophisticated AI ethics regulations that China has implemented. In fact, they're very close to the Europeans in terms of going all the way back to GDPR. China has the Personal Information Privacy Law, which is almost a carbon copy of the GDPR, except adapted to the governance structures of China that we just talked about. Now nobody here knows. But it's very similar, and they've done that also for AI ethics, right? And so, like, if people don't know this, and that it's very easy for unconscious cognitive biases to just fill in the blank, assuming, oh, China is totally unethical about AI, and then you end up making voting decisions that implement, sort of counterproductive actions on our policy that accelerate an arms race in that area that is extremely dangerous to the survival of humankind and the planet as a whole, right? Which was a big theme that I was speaking about yesterday. The true existential threat of AI is not AI yet. AIs are going to take over like Terminator, Skynet, Ex Machina, because humanity is going to destroy humanity before AI even gets a chance to do so. If we keep on going down this accelerated arms race dynamic at the same time that AI is commoditizing weapons of mass destruction and putting incredibly powerful weaponry that we didn't have in the 20th century world wars in the hands of everybody, including guerrillas in the remote mountainous villages of Myanmar. That is a toxic combination that is unlike any dynamic that a million of years of evolution have ever presented in the environmental selection.
So 40 hours ago at Silicon Valley Bank, you said that we can get out ahead of this, or we need to get out ahead of this. How do we do that?
Well, so one of the things that I've been doing, and the book coming out from MIT Press is very heavily about that. And by the way, please, on my website, which is my name, it's dek.ai, there's a blank right underneath the top where you can put in your email address because I'm right in the middle of negotiating with MIT Press, who said they will allow me to start distributing material from that book even before it actually drops in the coming year. I think changing the national conversation about what the true near-term immediate existential risks of AI to humankind are is the first step. Because so long as the entire population is stuck in the same three tired cliches about the dangers of AI. Either AI is going to destroy humanity, or we have to filter out anything that's actually a falsehood, a fake news, a deep fake, or bad actors. We have to put down the bad actors and we have to be stronger, which just accelerates an arms race. And so we need to those three narratives are sucking up all the oxygen from the immediate existential threat, which is kind of like we're shooting ourselves in the foot here. Because the way that we are allowing algorithmic censorship to hide stuff from us that we don't want to know, that we're not interested in knowing, that we don't know, that we don't know, that we don't know we need to know, is going to cause what in soccer is called an own goal, right? We're gonna And that is something that we need to also give a lot of oxygen to, so that we can start as a society collectively to start asking ourselves the key questions, which are what are the criteria by which the AI algorithmic sensors should be deciding what crucial contextual information to hide from us. And nobody's asking that question.
I totally agree with everything you're saying. But in addition to that, I would say, hasn't this been an issue since the beginning of media? Meaning, the New York Times editor just determines what the headline is, or Fox News determines what they show, CNN determines what they show, and it's all attention grabbing. As you point out, Xi Jinping did this. They didn't talk about the fifth guy in Iran who did something else, or Putin did that. So I think that's the challenge with. And aren't they doing it based on neurosystems that fear drives attention, which drives revenue, which drives all these other things? It's been an central problem.
So the difference, though, is things have shifted a great deal. The difference is that back then, the power was entirely in the hands of the generators, right? Of the author, the journalists, and the editors. There were no other channels. And if you ask, is the information about the fifth Rundle law out there? The answer would probably be no, it's not, because nobody has written about it. But with the advent of the internet, now you have billions of journalists, authors, writers, and all that information is actually out there. And the power has now shifted more towards curation. It's kind of like our common advisor, Bob Walensky, used to joke that, it used to be said that a million monkeys on a million typewriters would eventually, by accident, generate the works of Shakespeare. Now, thanks to the internet, we know that's not true. But in fact, it is kind of true. You just need to have a trillion monkeys on a trillion typewriters. All the content is actually out there today. And so whether the right information gets in front of someone is now, it's cutting both ways. One, the algorithms are deciding even more than the editors. Put only this in front of people because that's what's going to trigger them. That's what's going to be the outrage. And they're even better at it than the human editors were. And they can micro-target, which the human editors couldn't do. And the second part of it is, but all the information is out there now. And yet, the algorithmic curators, censors, are deciding not to bother informing you, even that it exists, much less that you might need to know this information.
So I remember in 2001, Al Gore joined the board for Google. He thought he was going to have a different job for the next 48 years, but it didn't work out for him. And he came and he gave this inspiring speech, and he says, you guys are providing access to all the world's information. It's going to make everything great. You're going to empower so many people and rise up the underprivileged. And he never once said, maybe you should watch out for disinformation, right? And sort of at that time, he and maybe also Gingrich, those were the two most plugged in, tech savvy politicians in the country and maybe in the world. Wasn't on their radar at all. So I think that's the real issue, is that maybe it's a Silicon Valley thing of we like to build stuff and we imagine we're building stuff for this use, so everybody's going to use it to do good. We don't really think about it can also be used in other ways. So I think that's a problem. I like everything that you say. I guess I disagree a little bit. I wouldn't use the word hiding. I would just say, I think we need a better sort of educational system, right? So as you say, anybody who was interested could find out how China works, but they don't. I don't think of that really as hiding, right? So I remember somebody saying, oh, I was living in England for a while, and you see in the news all these cricket scores. So there's all this information about cricket, but I don't know anything. What's an over? I don't know anything. But you could find that. It's not that that was being censored. It was just sort of assuming that wasn't what people want. So I think what we need is, don't just say, here's a news article of China did this and that, and here's the latest thing. Have something that's interactive, and maybe that says, do you understand this? Do you know how this works? And then you can say, no, and I don't care. Or you could say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. What is their structure? And build that shift
more modality a little bit, because if you think about sort of how, I was obviously pre-internet, as I guess everybody in this room was, not pre-internet, but pre-web. right? And then the web opened up all information. So just think about something as simple as SEC filings. The day before the web, you had to spend an enormous amount of money to get it. The day after the web, literally anybody with a library card can get it. That's awesome. I mean, the proliferation of access to information is phenomenal. I think you're actually addressing the human failing, not the technology. So what I like about, so if I go to Google and search for something, I get a certain amount of information. My son relies on Reddit, which pre-filters and gives him whatever crap he wants to read, and just I won't go down that rabbit hole. But now with things like Perplexity and others, they're often offering up the modality of ask me about something. So I will routine, and in fact, people promote this as an idea. They say, change your power button and ask it something each day. So as I mentioned, you talked about China's government. I said, what's China's government look like? And it told me some things so I can learn. So as we shift potentially with AI from search for what you're interested in, or let me as Facebook force something down your throat if you're one of these people that for some reason live their entire life on Facebook, that's different than when it's an open-ended box that lets me ask any question. And that question can be horrific in one person's mind, but that's the wonderful thing about America. You can learn about whatever you want.
Yeah, so like the discussion, this is great to hear. I mean, this is the kind of discussion I'm trying to provoke, right? And the thing is that, okay, I'm far be it for me to be against education. Obviously, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm a fourth generation academic. My dad and my great-granddad were presidents of major universities. I'm not arguing that education is important, clearly. That said, one of the things that makes this problem the most insidious is that amongst the hundreds of cognitive biases that have been researched, there are several that are operating at the meta level against what we're saying. For example, the more highly educated you are, it turns out, the more susceptible and vulnerable you become to your own cognitive biases unconsciously. And so people who say, oh, well, the solution is education, it's not that easy. It actually makes you better at reinforcing your unconscious biases. And then there's the G.I. Joe fallacy that I mentioned to some of you yesterday, where this comes from that old TV show G.I. Joe that always, at the end of the episode, some deep voice narrator would say, something like, and now knowledge is half the battle. As if, so like educating people about cognitive biases, you get this G.I. Joe fallacy that people think, oh, now I'm armed against it and I will fall victim to it. And it turns out empirically, that is the opposite of the truth, right? And so we need to go beyond just education, because the scientific data is that alone does not work. And there's things like the backfire effect, where even if you have an AI that puts the right information that is contradicting what you wanted to believe before in front of them, they dig in their heels even harder, and they selectively reject that. So there's all sorts of unconscious cognitive biases, selective perception, and so forth, that militate against, in our unconscious mind, militate against the attempts to get past that barrier. Voluntary choice, again, is very much a myth, because most of our voluntary actions are being driven by our unconscious, what we feel like doing. It's not rational. And yeah. Oh, sorry. I think she's been waiting patiently. Sorry.
Thank you. I was just thinking that this is like a really useful discussion. And one of the things that we should be having more of, right, with many disparate people. But in this room, many of us invest, we look at capital, I look at solutions for preventing harm to humanity. So I'm wondering, what are the practical things we can do now and implement as people who are looking at AI, looking at investing in it, I've invested in it myself, we're looking at how we can make a difference now and moving forward to the future as using capital in a responsible way, and also being part of society, because we're all in I have large AI networks across Europe as well as here. So I'm really interested in how we can influence those solutions and address the problems that we're seeing for humanity. I mean, I know that you talk a lot about changing society. You might have something to say about that, and how we can do that. But I think it's really important that we start. I would like to learn that from this.
Because, by the way, adding on that, I think what politicians, we gave up on a long time ago, but the consumer powers and the investor power, to your point, how are we as investors and philanthropists, what are your practical advice as against all these headwinds?
I mean, from my side, there are two areas immediately. One is on the communications front. So some of you heard about the 360-degree program I'm working on.
But like anything that uses
So like
360.
film, like film finance. I'm in discussions with extremely high-powered, like A24 directors, because this message needs to get out to the entire population, and it needs to be digestible in ways, you know, that are outside of 1% of the population.
My sister-in-law did the Barbie movie, so you can talk with Robbie. She's the producer.
Dramatizing the book, and by the way, you know, I have a copy of the book here if anybody wants to flip through it. But it's extremely accessible and extremely dramatizable.
So we make it a movie.
Making a movie, very important. Social media,
We could all make a lot of money at it
social
too.
media team just ramped up 2 weeks ago. So one thing to invest in that would really help move the needle so on a societal impact level would be that.
I can help with that.
That would be fantastic. And the other thing is the basic research in my labs. We've been building new prototypes for new kinds of enabling AI technologies that will help surface all of these things and would necessarily be, you know, some version of that would be a necessary component of any technological solution for it. But we first have to get society to collectively discuss, well, here's kind of roughly the you know, range of solutions that we would like to see. And that has to be an informed discussion, because again, because of all these unconscious cognitive biases, if you ask people now, they will just come up with things that won't work. And we have to have an educated debate about this, and then translate that through the dozens of think tanks I work with into policy guidelines that we could then talk again with our friends at Google and Facebook and so forth to say, hey, in a nonpartisan way, here's a reasonable range of actions that we could take in the algorithms and come to actually something that meaningfully moves the needle beyond simply, let's make sure that we remove all the outright fakes and lies, and let's look for bad actors, because again, 95% of the problem is stuff that is neither one of those.
There's 15 more minutes remaining, and I know the two of you have been waiting. Then you go.
I have a question more on the, kind of if I read between the lines of what you're saying, is we're seeing like a schism, basically one AI system emerging in US and its allies, and then another like big AI system against China and their allies. Would you say that in the future we'll have basically two ecosystems in the world that will not really talk to each other that much? And like, because I invest in things like autonomous driving, and like I don't see a US like a way more driving in China ever.
So this is one of the scary things to folks like me and, you know, Vince Cerf, founder of the internet, is the fragmentation of the internet. It is very much going that way right now. There are attempts against it. I was just speaking with a friend who's quite, you know, in Microsoft has been working in Asia for a long time, and they are actually trying to work with Chinese EV makers for, you know, Microsoft-based self-driving technologies, but they're going to have to be the Chinese EVs that are exported outside of China, because inside of China it's going to have to be another company, which, you know, is still a Microsoft joint venture or something like that. But you know, I think this kind of schism, we understand the national security reasons for it from all sides, and it looks like it's not just US and China. Like, it seems like every country is beginning to say, no, we have our own walls, right? And you can understand it from a national security standpoint, but it's also dangerous for two reasons. One is like we get more and more echo chambers, which is a very strong force for polarization and divisiveness that leads eventually to extremely dangerous, you know, World War III scenarios. And then the other is that you know, it's highly inefficient. It stops people from traveling. You know, it's been recently a real pain, even for me in Hong Kong, to go visit Shanghai because none of my apps work. You know, Uber doesn't work anymore, it used to. Right, and you have to, and the Chinese equivalent apps are in Chinese only. The user interface is in Chinese, and you can't pay using cash. Even a taxi or a store, they get really upset at you if you try to pay cash. right? But how are you gonna pay? And they have their own, you know, it's not like they use Venmo or PayPal, right? They have their own. And again, the user interfaces are in Chinese. And so all of this becomes an incredibly inefficient barrier to economics, trade, investing, but then also geopolitically, it's destabilizing. You know, the sharing of information and the ability to see past differences and come toward things that are actually alignable, at least in terms of outcomes, if not in terms of methodology, is still important for just the humanity to be able to survive in the AI era. And so I see that as dangerous, and at least coming to the table and trying to work out ways that we can mitigate that, take care of national security concerns of everybody, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Should every country be able to participate in the AI revolution?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, let's just, I mean, no, it's an interesting question because the question is right now, we're really, from a national security perspective, trying to outflank China, right? This is, I mean, and I'm sure you probably have some other context on the earlier comment you made this morning about we are at war.
Well, we're gonna talk about that in the next stops.
Yeah, exactly. But like, right, so the question is that should the Chinese, for example, Chinese government or the CCP have access to the same capabilities that we have today?
But how you stop that?
They already do, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's like, there aren't secrets here, and if you put together research teams and you can duplicate what's going on, and you know, putting in export controls slows it down a few months maybe.
Heisenberg, Oppenheimer, 1940s, right? Same thing.
Thinking about what you were saying about education and this entrenching that can happen. And I feel like, particularly with the ubiquitous nature of information, education should be thought of quite differently, that it's not anymore this accumulation of knowledge, but it's because you can always go get that, right? My daughter, you know, will have these questions, like, there's no debating, like, we can find the answer instantly. If you just want to know, like, is there another frozen yogurt? Right? But like, so what we spend time on, and what I really try to emphasize with her is like, you gotta, if you get a piece of information, the real thing you can add is the questioning, right? So my youth was all just like, okay, there's 50 states, the capital accumulation of knowledge, that was what training was, right? I think it would have been the education I got from my parents, which was question a lot of these things, like where did this come from? What do you think? Why is this wrong? Right? Is a much better foundational thing to spend time on. So I push back a little bit about that. Education is maybe not is a problem, but it's one that's solvable by utilizing this and changing the way we think about the way education. Right? It's not knowledge accumulation anymore.
So one half of me agrees. That's why I'm an educator. And actually agree, like especially on issues that you don't already have a strong belief in that is tied somehow to your identity or your ideology or things, then yes, it does seem to work. That kind of training in critical thinking, exploration, curiosity, it does work. So if I'm investigating a scientific question or something, it definitely works. But then what happens is that on other issues that are, and this is again sort of the empirical study of all these cognitive psychologists, where your a priori belief is something that is tied to your identity, then all that training doesn't work. And like I've personally witnessed this amongst highly educated, I tend to be surrounded by extremely educated people, because of the nature of my job. And they tell me, look, I read across the entire political spectrum. I read everything from Wall Street Journal and Financial Times and all the way to, The Guardian and New York Times, right? And I don't take any of those opinions just for granted. I read across the entire political spectrum, and so I have actually a balanced view. I'm not susceptible to the things you're talking about. And then I run the thought experiment that I just ran on you guys, and it turns out they don't know either. But they're making votes extremely strongly based on assumptions that, despite all their training, it doesn't even occur to them to check.
The biggest unconscious bias is that you don't have any unconscious biases.
Yeah. So let me defend the news industry for a little bit. That I thought was really effective. So the LA Times had this article and online game that you could play called Balance the California Budget. And they said a lot of people came in with strong prejudice saying, I think it's really important to defend the environment. And so there's these lists of things and price tags, and you go through and say, you definitely need to spend on this and this and this and this. And then you look in the bottom and it's red by $100 million. You say, uh-oh, if I want to win this game, I got to select some things. And all of a sudden you're saying this thing that I thought was so important, now I'm changing it and saying, maybe we got to do it another way. And so I think there are ways of getting people to change and going deeper than just looking at the headline.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, that's the kind of thing that I did for this. Some of you might know about my work in 2020 that helped flip public opinion on the need to urgently get everybody to put on masks to slow down the spread of COVID. And that's exactly the kind of game that I put up, that people would put in their browsers and dial in their own assumptions about how effective masks were or not, and population densities, and just hit play and run simulations. There are definitely games that you can play to overcome this effect. The issue is that people aren't doing that for many of the most dangerous trigger point flashes that could set off World War III, et cetera. And if we did that, it could help. There are lots of things like that that could help, but
I mean, technology
we're not doing it.
when we first started really spending time on immersive AR and VR, the most interesting thing I saw was a day, an hour in the life of a recently landed on a boat refugee from a horrific environment, right? So you put on these goggles for donors, and instead of just talking about how horrible the situation is, they're there struggling.
Paul, are you listening? This is your thing.
They ended up massively increasing the donations. Great. So technology can always make things better, get you closer. We've had access to information since the Library of Alexandria, and Benjamin Franklin did a great thing in creating libraries in the United States. There was a great quote in the movie once, some Matt Damon thing like, I can get a better education with a library card than you got at Harvard because you didn't apply yourself. We give people great tools, but fundamentally what you are pointing out, people don't care.
Yeah.
And the fact that there might be an erudite group in this room that cares a lot and that you get exposed to all the time is not, I don't know how to change that. What's the old saying? You'll never go broke underestimating the intelligence of the average American. Like there's a lot, I'm not saying Americans aren't smart, but there are just a lot. I said to you, and not as an ignorant person, but I haven't spent any time researching China because I don't care about it on a daily basis.
But like every time I've bullshitted myself with things, and trust me, for many times, you constantly come to this wake up point where you're like, okay, this is not actually the way, right? So, we hit this point now with the climate crisis. We hit this point with Wall Street where people were bullshitting until the end of time. So even like the smallest consumer and person, economically speaking, at some point wakes up and says, wait a second, the system is actually hurting me. No?
Well, when we switched over the conversation.
More Americans vote that don't pay taxes than vote that pay taxes. That was why Romney didn't get elected, and he was right. Okay, well, you think they're worried? You think they care? They're sucking off the tit of the
not
corporate.
That they're worried.
Yep.
I know that there's a wake up point where you realize, hey, this is not actually good.
That's an advanced way of thinking, and my challenge here is just, I'm fascinated by the example of the game. It's great. You basically trick people into learning.
Yeah, but Ben, what's really interesting.
There's two more questions, one from him and one from me.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about sucking tits, but we'll move on. I'm curious. I've got things popping in my head, but I don't have a specific question. It's like you mentioned in the presentation, agents, assistants, people using the word cobots, digital twins. So is there an opportunity there where we all have control and we decide what we want, what we don't want, based on all the applications and things that are going on in the world? What's your thoughts around? Is that where it's going? Can you see a future where in this room and half of us are physically here and half of us are not physically here? and our digital twin is here on our behalf, filtering. I don't know, I'm just things popping in my head.
Who's
I mean, we already have remote meetings, and you can get notes from them. We already are kind of.
Now, I'm talking about all the censorship, all the what you want to see, what you don't want to see.
Oh, okay, here's the problem with that, is that sometimes people say, okay, well, the answer is we need to be able to tell Google or the YouTube recommendation algorithms or whatever, or we need to be able to set choices on what we want to hear, right? And so, like, let's say, another thought experiment, let's say you Google climate change is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. Now, do you think that the response from Google should be 100 hits that proves that climate change is a hoax? How many people think, yes, that's what Google should do? Right, okay. How many people think that maybe at least Google should return some things that say, oh, yeah, and by the way, here's some reasons why climate change might not be a hoax, some potential evidence. And by the way, a few more things, like China was the last major power in the world to come to the table and even admit that climate change was real. But then they flipped 180 degrees and, they accelerated. So most people say, yeah, it should probably balance out the results, right? Okay, so would you agree? Yeah. Okay. So now the question I'm going to ask you: what percentage of the results that Google returns do you think should be giving you exactly what you already wanted to believe? The articles that prove climate change is a hoax. What percentage should be? Maybe this isn't what you wanted, but here's evidence against what you wanted.
Last question.
Question for Peter. Big fan.
Wait, sorry, that was a
question.
That was in the middle of
the question is flawed because Google's job isn't to interpret your question and give you an opinion. Its job is to take in data, requesting information, and match that query to the information available that matches the query. It has no soul, it has no heart, it has no balance, it has no ethics. If I say, how many X's or Y, it'll deliver how many X's or Y, not say
you're looking at it from a 1990s standpoint, where it's like database retrieval, but it's moved way past that now. And these are AI algorithms, especially if you go and now you look at the chatbot answers. No, it's interpreting your question, it's constructing a logic, and it's attempting to explain things to you. And that AI, which is way beyond database retrieval, keyword retrieval, is actually trying to construct a meaningful, logical, coherent, rational answer to what you're expressing.
Do we have time for more discussion?
We just have one question.
I have one more.
No, sorry.
Peter, as a leading AI researcher at Google, are you against or for the pause on AI, like Joshua, you and your colleagues, Elon Musk?
Yeah, so I don't know if that was ever a serious proposal, right? And no one ever thought that doing a pause would be possible. I think the point was to start a discussion, and I think they did a good job of doing that. And I actually had a student did a term project on writing to people who signed the various letters. So there was a pause letter, and there was another one, and so on, saying, with a sort of deeper questionnaire, what did you mean when you signed this letter? And the conclusion was that what most people meant was, I didn't agree with these words or that words, or maybe I don't think there should be a pause. But what I meant was, this is a really serious topic that we should be having a discussion about. And so I think that's important. I think for the pause, that was at a time in which a lot of the work was really focused in the various biggest competitors, the big cloud providers with the huge data centers. And I think we're past that now, right? So it is still true that the very biggest frontier models have a slight edge, but these much smaller models are really not that far behind. And so it's impossible to pause because anybody can play in this game now. So I think that conversation is long past.
So we're believers in continuous discussions, and we have to move on.
Yeah.
But would you be open to, speaking of hybrid, joining another discussion, might be a much larger group, you might sell more books. But we also do breakouts on, and then we all come back and debrief. I think it could be very
So when does
interesting.
the book come out again?
In a year, I know it's really something. So we're gonna ramp up the communications before that. As I mentioned, if you sign up, we'll get at least some of the book out to you.
Mhm.
There's other things I just,
yeah,
on this
yeah.
question, there was like this, New York Times piece that I wrote that you're holding, on that exact question. There's other articles, we can probably get these, this is the journalist, and
There's also
Yeah.
opportunity to co-invest when a movie is produced. Yeah, so.
I have a follow-up question for Peter. When is your next AI course will be on and your photography?
Oh, that's right. AI class, that's a great question. I keep talking with Stuart Russell saying we need to update the book. You know, we usually update it every 5 or 6 years. Now it's been 2 years, but it's way more out of date than it's ever been.
Mhm.
And he doesn't want to do an update because he says, I want to understand everything first before we do it. And I said, we don't have that much time. We can't afford to have to understand it all. And I'm reluctant because I say, I think books are getting obsolete.
Mhm.
You know, most students don't have the patience to go through it. So I want there to be the tool that I can build an online interactive experience with rather than just a book. And I'm working on that now. So that's that. I don't know if I'll do an online class the way I did with the Udacity. Maybe I'll do smaller things instead, and try to push out this. You know, we have large language models that just have an empty box, and you can ask anything you want. And we have books that have 20 chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row. And we need something in the middle that says you can pick and choose, you can ask questions, but it's not just an empty box. It'll lead you through the material.
Mhm.
So that's what I would like to do. And if I could do that, then I'll release that for you.
I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but thank you, both of you.
Do you guys have an approval process on what mass can be used?
What for the fabrication?
Oh, yeah, not for the times.
Your laces get loose there, you're gonna take 1 million nanoparticles out of the street.
Yeah. To fix that here.
Pick it up and look at it and see if it looks okay. Although in a few cases you can. Graphene is an interesting one. There's a certain layer of pieces of graphene that actually can detect, even though they're only a couple atoms thick, you can see 2 atoms thick versus 1 atom thick. They look different under light. This tool right here is an atomic layer deposition. So it allows you to chemically coat systems with a layer of material at a time or close to that. Single monolayer material. So when you're really making precise things, you're an angstrom level control what material you're putting down. And what you need when you're making those really advanced circuitry. This is the kind of tool that does that. Open up shit like that. So this tool, I was in charge of buying it, so I have to know exactly what it costs. See, it's got 2 chambers on it. It would cost about $350,000 to get it in here, and then it costs another $100,000 for Santa Clara to say it was okay to use and say. And how many of them? Just one there. I've got five chambers too. So that's 2 out of which is pretty good. I mean, for a university, most probably. Why do we have 5 chambers? It's used a lot, but also there's certain things to do. If I want to use India, anybody wants to make a transistor again, that's the migration of the ion.
I think guys in like Dubai and Saudi, and they're trying to put the bigger things to.
So there's Keist, the king of dual instance, called Keist. Keist in Saudi Arabia. You go there, you will see 30 of these machines all just stacked up. About the money. There's so much outside. And I would say partly it's the house, but also it's like I have a good friend who goes there in Egypt, like my students go to house anytime they want for free because they have all these no one to. So they have the money to buy all that stuff, but they're not actually. We'll get it in time. A lot of what goes on here is this. So, the M4 chip now, the iPad 5 really advanced 5 nanometer photons now. Some of the original work on having that magnetic material that's inside the transistor happened here. It's actually done by Intel at Stanford. 12 years later, it's now the winding path of how this is happening. They're not really going fast, right? And part of it is because of what we do, right? You think about how many transistors are made in the world right now. There's 10 to the 24 transistors made every year. And that's 10 to the numbers. That's the number of stars that you make that many transistors. Next year, we're going to make twice that. So that kind of burden of manufacturing means that the cycle to get there is actually pretty consistent in a decade. What it means is it costs a lot more to stay on that decade, right? The cost of it. So Moore's law, right? Transistor gets smaller, it burns less energy. There's also this Moore's law that you're getting exponentially cheaper cost per transistor, cost per gate. And that's changed. We actually did dip and came back. Right? So 28 nanometers, which was 2012 timeframe, that was our cheapest technology. And we've gone back up. Everything since then has gotten a little bit more expensive. Pretty flat, but still a little bit more expensive here. Now paying a few millions of pennies per transistor. Still get more transistors, but they cost because keeping that cycle, keeping everything going, feeding that beast is the problem. And keep shrinking. We really hit these limits, and so now we're thinking, how do we go? Can't shrink anymore. How do I do something different? How do I? Because we really need the horsepower.
2014 it went commercial, but you will have like 20 years behind that in terms of actually getting it in the lab for the first time.
So 28 nanometers was one of the last planar transistors before you went to a FinFET. The semiconductor part of the transistor stood up on its own. That really came in 20 and 18. And so that FinFET came in 2014, was really commercially widely available. The original papers were out of Berkeley in 1997, 96, right? So that time frame of like shown at a university that makes great transistor, published, read upon, to like peer review to like being in a commercial device to buy a little over, about 20 years, 10 years from the point like we should commercialize FinFET. 10 years from when paper was written to like Intel had FinFET process, another 8 years before they locked it.
Yeah.
Do you guys do optical technology as well?
Oh yeah,
for chips.
Yeah. There's John Fan, both in which engineering do quite a bit of quantum computational photonics. Okay. Yeah. Actually, they use the other lab.
How much energy is used here?
Yeah, so it's pretty big, powerful. That's why we used to have a power plant like right across the street there. It's been torn down in a new building to get our power, the central power. I don't know from a watt hour number, but it's enormous in that the scale TSMC. TSMC is the biggest energy pole of all time. It's the water pole of all Taiwan. There's a point where Taiwan is like we don't have enough water to have TSMC and CPU going.
What's the cost of power in Palo Alto and Stanford?
Terrible. Yeah, no one would ever build anything here for the point of mass manufacturing. One, two. So I have a good friend who has a company local. They cut ingots and wafers and make the wafers out of the ingots, and they prototyped everything here and built the first thing. But as soon as they're ready to do any kind of scale, their customers chips for EVs. So it's a fraction of the digital competition. They're immediately like, where do we go?
Come to Ohio.
Let me tell you about where I grew up in Oklahoma. Land is cheap, energy is cheap.
Hey, go to Canada.
What are the water? In the east, it's in the eastern part of the state, where it's like you have the underground river.
Just move a little, let people in the back here.
Yeah. So, anyways, you see this is one of these positive materials, adding materials. The other side will be
other people.
They all look the same. They're a big box. It's really controlled environment. Energy to drive it. Even temperature. Just keep walking around here.
Good. Good. All right. I like to hear it. Like those words. I could do those more often. Like the launch. Yeah.
It's French, right?
Emo.
I would think that.
Yeah.
Like that's not.
Really? Okay, must have a lot of money. He's working on So, have you guys stop here? You don't see the clean room, but it's here. You're just walking around the first floor. Mainly because if you look in here and you look up, you'll notice there's 2 more floors to the building, and there's a floor below the basement. Those are all in support of the clean room. It's generally true if you have a nano fab clean room facility that 25% of the total volume is actually usable space to work on. Everything else is a support. Gas handling, air handling, toxic chemicals, we got meaning safety for that, pumps, everything. That's so that's it's true to University Lab, it's true to Eastern. That's your last year. 25% is all gas working, the other 75% is support for that. All right. The other side of the lab, be one of our caged animals in here in their suits, working away. But again, the tool, he's on a tool that's now one of those subtractive tools, an etcher, right? You put in the material, that'll remove some chemical, introduce some chemistry to remove materials, often selectively. One material gets removed, one doesn't. Always chemistry, or sometimes upgrade. Sometimes you do pure physical, where you're like, I'm sending something inert, like an argon ion, and just having hit the system and knock everything off. And then it's nuts. This thing kind of goes away based on its natural hardness of the atomic number. But you know, the tools look the same. Big boxes, wafer goes inside, lots of safety and everything around it. You just type on the computer and go. And it's, I think, yeah, more modern lab, get away from you know, taking the wafer physically out, you know, with tweezers and putting it somewhere else. And it's just that you unload the whole box, put the box on the robot takes it away. You're just there to make sure. Like, I mean, honestly, I don't know what you're there for. But you're there to fix something if the machine fixes it.
Yeah.
So now you see it's white light here, not the yellow light down there. So quick quiz, why is that here? Why can we have white light here and have yellow light in that room where we do the patterning? Anybody know? By filter light, the light thing is, I have something to do with that. Yeah, that's right. I'm taking out the blue light, why it's yellow in there, because blue light is the high energy light. That's the light we use to pattern. So it's really the UV. So we're just taking that out. It's just like a dark room for film photography, that red light. When you're in there, you got to be careful that you don't accidentally change your chemicals that are light sensitive, so you get that yellow light. I never was bothered by it, but I had students who were just like, it drives me crazy. I'm in there for 20 minutes, like my head hurts and stuff. You could step out here in the white light. Just don't take all your photosensitive chemicals with you. Everyone does once. They do it in a week of work, not
What if they would leave it open by accident for a day?
Some things it's fine, you can leave it open, but that's all about vapor pressure, right? Is it going to dissolve over time? Also, is it safe? Right? There's a lot of stuff that we work with in here that are very dangerous, right? And so you only open them inside a fume hood, right? You see these chemical benches where the air is being pulled out, and there's marks on there to tell you if you're going to open a chemical, it's got to be behind this line. So the safe way to practice is you don't leave the chemicals open, not in a fume hood, period, no matter what they are. They're just simple alcohol, because it could be really bad. We use xylenes for some of the patterning. Xylenes are known neurotoxins, or they're guarded by the Geneva Convention. We use the chemical agent. But they're excellent at cross-linking polymers to make patternable material. A lot of stuff, right? So one of the main things you hear about in a clean room is hydrofluoric acid. It removes glass or silicon oxide really well, but it doesn't attack silicon. So it's a great way to clean the surface of a silicon semiconductor very well. It also is really good at dissolving your bone, right? So you can't feel it. You get it on you.
So how is security here?
Well, you saw it. We just marched right in.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this is all locked up. You need a key pass to get in there. The main thing is really security for people staying safe and their water staying safe. That's all just good laboratory practice and not doing things that are going to harm the research. There's a university is very open-minded about like information sharing. And main security function a lot of you experienced this morning trying to find Spoker 143 is that the university is amazed that all the people who live here understand. Yes, like we put very few maps, and they're always pointed in the area.
Okay.
It
works.
Yeah, and so, but it's a wonderful thing to be at a university and like everyone can walk everywhere. The buildings are open all throughout the day, and like there are tragic incidents there because of that occasionally, but it's worth it to have that environment. That's what we're living in. Intellectual park. All right, let's just whip down here and get into it.
Whip down.
Sorry.
Yeah, we got 40 people here. Two new people just joined.
Just right now. So we're gonna get back across the street. Spilker, see another facility that's kind of like this. It's a little different. It's built separately to handle more aggressive physics at an even smaller scale. It's a little more thinking about outside this is really good devices. I don't know.
There's really good data. Yeah, they look a little confused, but they get the job done. Yes. So I don't like that. I wasn't even under was founded like 5 years ago. I joined university. And it's the only one there that has a specific international focus. We don't just work, and that was one of the things that drew me to it because I'm an international student. And Berkeley is like 80% American, so it was nice. We have like a very good split on the club. Like we have a bunch of Americans, but also a bunch of international students. But also we have to that we have like a variety of projects that are doing good events. We had like the best clients like National L'Oreal. And it's something like summarize our project. Very lovely. This semester we went to FNAP, which is really lovely. And we do like 5 like a nice their experience and also wanted to start it. And a lot of people are still want to go to consulting to use it like this way to like understand the business. Yeah. And some people are like never just graduate we're gonna work so we can see yeah, how like the internships and employees so on. But I like don't think consulting is my end goal. Like I think that's the more
Well, I don't know how he has the.
how did you find
Studying.
What's that?
With the second book, the Kailash Satyarthi, who's the Nobel Prize winner. It's, his goals are similar to what she's trying to do as well.
All right, we'll let everybody filter in.
More patterning.
Okay. So this is the Stanford Nano shared facility. Sounds like what we just saw, but it's a little bit different. And it was largely built because we were running out of space over there, and there was real emphasis on bringing some new high performance pieces of equipment, like the E-beam pattern system, all the possibly tell with the suit on. But this is the chance to make stuff down to that single digit. And there's also transition electron microscope that's over there that can see things at a single atom level, okay, and measure them. So, X-ray. No, it's a trend. There's also one of those. Okay. This is purely transmission electron. Okay. And so really, this new space is really pushing the fundamentals and physics unless kind of the idea for this. Also, there's one about buy these really expensive pieces of equipment. I need donors to pony up for them, and you want donors to need to build a building their name on. Sure. So that way you could bring in more money. You actually build a building and fill it with all. You're like, oh, this is going to be $100 million building, but that's $40 million equipment. That can really start to pay the bills. This photography tool back here is $2.5 million. Buy another several $100,000 a year to run. The transmission electron microscope is $4 million. So cool. And the desires to have two because you like running breaks or if they get twice as much work you want to get done. So again, facilities here.
Who makes these?
So that's Japanese Electron. Makes the photography tool. The microscope is been merged. Titan. So PI is the parent company. They do a lot of electron measurement tools. SEM. So they're based in
How many are there in the world?
20, maybe a little more than that. Yeah, this is one of the very first ones. The very first one. Livermore. Sorry, Lawrenceburg. That's where it showed it all. It looks very different. It doesn't look like product. It's like science. It's probably nice. I think there's one here. There's one at Harvard. Boston, like Harvard, MIT had a battle. Right. Harvard won, and I think there's like 5. I don't know how many there are. It's a real question. It's hard to answer. Yep. What do you guys thing?
That's like a bigger public lecture. Unfortunately, it's been very
Battery research.
Study, but it's same dimensions, right down the street. Oh, cool. But now they got a whole building saying that.
What is this?
They just thought-
What is it?
Kind of a new
Packard's original garage.
Oh, I see. Replica of Hewlett and Packard's
California.
original garage.
So everybody, right back up and upstairs, and happy to answer any questions. In case the facilities that are here, chance, company, researchers to get stuff on their own. All right.
Cool.
Very well.
So team, I'm gonna shut this down and then we'll come back here.